Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army in JAG Corps. He has a Substack, which you know about. Subscribe to glennkirschner.substack.com. And, of course, his wildly popular YouTube show, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, which you can check out for free on YouTube every night. Glenn, thanks for being on, especially there's so much news going on. And I know you're the go-to guy, so thank you for being here, brother.
Thanks, Dean. Great to be with you.
So let's look. The story in Minnesota is obviously developing. A couple of hours ago, we know a 37-year-old woman who was unarmed was shot by ICE agents. Kristi Noem just did a press conference calling the woman a domestic terrorist, literally called her a domestic terrorist. The video we've seen, look, there's different angles. But before I get your reaction to that, I want people to know the legal standard as a former federal prosecutor. When can federal agents use deadly force?
So really, the law of self-defense is not that different for you and I and police officers. If you are at imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury because of an attack, you can use the amount of force necessary to repel that attack up to and including deadly force. So you can use deadly force to, basically protect your life, breaking it down in layman's terms, or to protect the lives of others, members of the community who might be put at imminent risk. Imminent is an important word. Imminent risk of serious bodily injury or death. You can use the amount of force necessary to repel that kind of an attack, including deadly force. Dean, that's the standard. Now, we can go beyond that, and we'll probably get there with the idea of qualified immunity for police officers who engage in force that might be excessive force. It might even be deadly force. And then the question becomes, were they acting sort of reasonably within the scope of their duties, even if they overreacted a little bit? And that is where the rubber meets the road. But we can get to that in a minute.
Sure. And I was looking at the DOJ website. They actually have their own internal regulations, which match like Tennessee versus Gardner, one of the big Supreme Court cases. In other cases, it says deadly force may not be used solely to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect. Now, there is a conditional place afterwards where you can, but that's right in I'm reading the DOJ website, section .200, use of deadly force and prohibited restraint techniques. Number 2, firearms may not be discharged solely to disable moving vehicles. The only time it says they can be used, and it's your point of the idea of an imminent threat of life by the operator of the car. Now, let's turn our attention. Look, the story is developing in Minnesota. I've seen different angles of the shooting. We know the woman's 37. We know there's no indication she was armed, that she was an unarmed person, that ICE agents tried to stop her. And then at one ICE agent chose, not all of them, just one. And we didn't even see him draw his gun in the video that I saw. Somehow has his gun out and fires several shots to the car and kills her. From what you've seen, what's your reaction?
So let me just make clear, I've only seen one camera angle, and that is somebody who was holding a camera that person appeared to be standing sort of on the rear driver's side of the car. So really, we got a pretty full view of what was going on the driver's side of that vehicle, where there was an officer positioned up by the driver's door and an officer positioned by the rear driver's side passenger door, who appeared to be trying to perhaps open the door. But as the vehicle was pulling away from the officers, those two officers, and I didn't see any officers in front of the vehicle, I'm qualifying it, Dean, because if there are angles that would put officers in the direct path of that vehicle as it was beginning to accelerate, that would change the defense of others calculus. Not necessarily the self-defense calculus, but the defense of others calculus. Based on the angle I saw, it looks like an indefensible murder. Okay. I was a prosecutor for 30 years, but for 22 of those years, I was a homicide prosecutor in the courts of Washington, D.C., and I was also chief of homicide at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. So I was responsible for all murder investigations and prosecutions. I will also add, because I think it's relevant to this conversation, in my former office, we had a civil rights section. I know civil rights is no longer a thing for DOJ. We had a civil rights section, and part of their responsibilities included when there would be allegations of police excessive force resulting in injuries to members of the public, our civil rights section would investigate whether there was any criminal conduct or not by the
Right.
officers. If the excessive force resulted in death, which I will say, Dean, was probably, 99.5% of the cases didn't result in death. We would get allegations that a police officer beat a man who was in handcuffs. Unfortunately, we would see that happen. That's obviously criminal conduct, unless the person in handcuffs is somehow posing a threat to the officer's safety. But they almost never involve death, fatal shootings by police officers. But we had some of those cases, right? When we had those, the civil rights attorneys weren't homicide prosecutors, so they would call on me. They would say, look, you're the homicide guy. Will you come down and be part of our assessment of what we're seeing here? So I actually had the opportunity to be involved in these kinds of investigations and weigh in with my experience, my opinion based on handling murder cases for decades. So, and we had a case that was very close to these facts that happened here in actually Northern Virginia with the Park Police killing an unarmed motorist who was pulling away. And that informs some of my opinions here. But what I see on that video, at least the one angle I saw, it does not look like legitimate law enforcement conduct. It looks like murder. It looks criminal to me. So then the next question becomes, okay, if it's criminal, what happens? And there are two paths that this case can take. It looks like that the officer who discharged his weapon probably violated state law, some level of homicide. I don't know what degree of homicide it might be. It might be second-degree murder. It might be manslaughter, right? There are different kinds of homicide depending on the circumstances. But it looks like it probably is a state crime. It looks like it's probably a federal crime. So the first question becomes, okay, what happens to the case? Well, Dean, I think, we're old enough to appreciate that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel are not going to pursue criminal charges in this case, right? Because listen, if they did, on the extraordinarily, unlikely event that Pam Bondi's Department of Justice indicted this guy, Donald Trump would pardon him and probably give him some kind of a presidential medal, right? So I think it's very unlikely the feds will prosecute him. But Dean, if the state law enforcement authorities, both the police and the prosecutors, do not vindicate a violation of their state laws, a murder of somebody I don't know if it was a resident of Minnesota, but somebody within their state, they need to enforce the law even against the federal officer. If they do that, let's assume that the state presents the case to a grand jury, the grand jury indicts the federal officer. Here's the next thing that will happen. The federal officer will file a motion with federal court to remove the case from state court to federal court. We have a perfect example of that in recent history. Remember when Donald Trump was charged with 34 felony crimes in New York? What did he try to do? Wait. I'm a federal official. You can't try me in state court for these crimes because they were related to my official duties as president. Well, they weren't, but that was his claim. So you have to remove this case to federal court. And what did Judge Alvin Hellerstein, who's back in the news, say? Yeah. He said, "Oh, this has nothing to do with your presidential duties, paying off porn stars. You're going to stay in state court. That's where you're going to be tried." And ultimately, that's where he was convicted of 34 felony crimes. But if the federal officer who just killed this woman succeeds in getting his case taken from state court into federal court, importantly, Dean, it doesn't become a federal prosecution. It becomes a state court prosecution that is handled in federal court. What does that give the defendant, the federal officer, the opportunity to do? Make a robust argument that he has qualified immunity, that what he did, even if it was a bit of an overreaction, should enjoy immunity against prosecution because he really was acting within the scope of his official duties. Now, here's the thing. People will say, well, the fix is in if it goes to federal court. The judge is necessarily going to say qualified immunity, case dismissed. Not true. Not true. I trust the federal judiciary to get these calls right. I don't always agree with the federal judiciary, but more often than not, in the overwhelming percentage of the cases, they get these calls right. So it would mean he would go to trial on those state charges, albeit in federal court, potentially, if it wasn't remanded back to state court by the federal court judge. And it would still end up being a state court conviction, which would be beyond the reach of a presidential pardon. So a lot of moving pieces with respect to the course the investigation or investigations plural may take. But my bottom line, Dean, what I saw on the one camera angle, and I will reassess and I will
understand. And there
I
are
will
other
correct the
angles.
record if I see something different.
Right.
What I saw looked like an indefensible murder of a human being who was pulling away from the officers. And the fact that we're labeling this person a domestic terrorist is effing despicable. It's Orwellian. And Dean, you can spew that bullshit into the public square. You can't go into court and say that, because Donald Trump is forever spewing garbage into the public square. The minute he was sitting in front of a jury in New York, they convicted him of 34 felonies like that. That's because propaganda is not admissible in a court of law proper.
And I so appreciate that you went through the whole thing there, because there are different camera angles. I think when you see other ones, just like in real life, things are sometimes more gray. There is one angle where it's great because you saw the two officers on the side. The one that did the shooting was a third one that's not in the video that you don't see from that angle. And he's in front of the car, right? So let me ask you, just assume that officer in front of the car's going 1 mile an hour. That officer could have simply stepped aside.
Yeah.
So how does that change? If assume that's the fact, he could have stepped aside. Instead, he takes his gun out and fires into the car, into the person's face, and kills them.
If they were, listen, and that will change the calculus. And I'm glad you brought that to my attention, because once an officer can make a plausible, even if it's a stretch, a plausible assertion that I was in the direct path of a car that, yeah, may have been doing 1 mile an hour, but the foot was on the accelerator and it was about to leap into me, and I had to discharge my weapon for, to save my own life and the life of others. That could be, not just a straight-faced qualified immunity claim. It could be a completely winning defense, right?
Right.
So again,
I just want to put out there, because I'm seeing all different angles too. I'm not in any way defending the officer's action. When you see this viscerally, like, this is murder. ICE just executed someone. There was no need for this to happen. I mean, Glenn, in the big picture, we don't know much about this 37-year-old woman. She's unarmed. According to Congressman Omar, she was a legal observer, which they said had some status. She was there watching the ICE agents. That you see the cops come out. You know what I must say, Glenn? This is undisputed. They shoot her, and none of the ICE agents go run to help her after her car hits. You would think, as an American citizen, or as Americans, we would be concerned. You shot somebody. I would think normal police officers, if they shot someone, would run up to the person afterwards to see if they can help them. One officer, you could see him walking. The other one just stood around their car 100 feet away.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, the angle I saw, it looked like there was a citizen who was running to try to potentially assist the woman who was in the car. Yeah, I saw that. Right. But yeah, I mean, you actually are obligated as a police officer, a sworn officer, to render aid to somebody once that person no longer poses a threat to officers or others in the community. So, I would like to see all the camera angles, and everything I said today was a caveat that included only that one angle that I saw.
No, and look, Glenn, let's take a step back. This is not the first incident with ICE committing an act of violence. They did shoot a man in Chicago and kill him, and that was a guy trying to flee as well. There's numerous complaints about physical assaults. There was an article in NPR just in October. The headline was, ICE agents getting more and more lethal and dangerous and tackling people. This is going on and on. And Glenn, I think there's a connection between something you and I talked about forever, which is Donald Trump pardoning the January 6th terrorists, sends a message to everyone who works in ICE and everyone in this administration: commit all the crimes you want in service of my agenda. I got your back on the other side before you leave. Do you view this connection the same way?
Listen, I said this last night at Jim Acosta's event commemorating the 5-year anniversary that he held of January 6th that he held at the National Press Club. Donald Trump doesn't back the blue. Donald Trump backs those who beat the blue. Period. Plain and simple. He pardoned people who beat the hell out of police officers. Um, now, but I think we have to take it one step further. If the blue are out there running roughshod over the rights of citizens, documented immigrants and undocumented immigrants alike, oh, then Donald Trump's got your back. If you're out there doing wrong, as the people who were doing wrong on January 6th, his angry mob that he sent to the Capitol to stop the certification, if people are doing wrong, I think whether you're civilians or you're police officers, he's got your back. He's got, I mean, and it translates to fraud, massive, massive, massive fraud that has been perpetrated by, you know, these fat cat criminals that he pardons. I mean, if you're doing wrong, Donald Trump's got your back.
If you're doing wrong in the service of Donald Trump, he's got your back. So look, you and I, Glenn, I can't tell people who don't know us, and if you know us, you know this is true. For years after President Biden came in office, we were begging DOJ to move more swiftly in the prosecution of Donald Trump. Glenn and I actually talked about, I did research on citizens' arrest of Donald Trump. We talked about doing a press conference outside of DOJ, and it's not Merrick Garland alone. He's one component. If Republicans in the Senate did the right thing in his impeachment trial, he'd been banned, and the GOP Supreme Court did not protect him. But the big picture is Donald Trump never held accountable. Here we are 5 years later. He puts a website up where he blames in the website at our taxpayer dollars, blaming the police, your friends, Michael Fanone, Danny Hodges, Sergeant Gannell, and others for the violence, saying they provoked the violence. Did your stomach turn? Did that make you want to vomit?
You know, at the event last night, Mike Fanone, Harry Dunn, Aquilino Gonell, and Daniel Hodges were there, and Adam Kinzinger, who was, you know, on the J6 House Select Committee. It's such bullshit. It's so Orwellian. It's the kind of thing that can only fool the gullible. The people, you know, who Donald Trump will, you know, say anything, and they'll be like, "Dear leader, you know, you're right. We got you." It's completely untethered to the truth that we saw with our own eyes on January 6th. And but it's such an obscene disservice that he does to the police officers who were protecting Democrats and Republicans alike on January 6th. They're protecting Mike Pence from being hung. Are you kidding me? And he's still lashing out at his own vice president.
Yep,
as well. I mean, it is it's indecent, it's obscene, it's absurd, it's dangerous, it's violence inducing because he's condoning violence in the past, which encourages violence in the future. It's all of those things, Dean. And unless and until either the Republicans in Congress stand up and give a crap about our democracy, or the people rise up, and I'm not talking violently, I'm talking peacefully, rise up and you know, wield our economic power and every other power we have, and dethrone this aspiring dictator, we're just going to suffer more of the same. And at some point, when do we all rise up and say, you know what, sport, we're done with you. We're done. I mean, give us the other. What's the mascara guy? The vice president. He's the
JD Vance.
Well, I call him JV Vance because he'll never make varsity.
JV Vance. I like
give us him. I mean, yes, he's dirty and nefarious and all that, but he's the devil we don't know at this point, and we know the devil we got, and he's taking countries left and right, and he's about to try to break NATO apart by going to Greenland. So listen, it's time to rise up peacefully. It's time.
I agree. Speaking of the devil, Glenn, when's the devil going to call Donald Trump home? When's the devil going to go like, look, come back home. You've done so much more damage than we expected. Welcome back. I think you know your friend Jeffrey Epstein, and they can just hang out in hell and play, because this is the man. Trump is, I think JD Vance is actually a really bad person. I hope people will take more notice to him. But when we see now everything we know about Donald Trump and everything we know about the criminal justice system, Trump not being in any way held accountable, he goes further and further. So now you take it to Venezuela. He's not going to stop with Venezuela. He's taking their oil. He said they gave us their oil. They gave us, you just kidnapped the boss of the, and you have the military with the gun to her head.
Like the bank just gave me the money I robbed from it.
Right. So, but the point is, if the world does not stand up to Donald Trump the same way they stood up to Putin, and the same way they failed to stand up to Hitler, isn't it just 2 + 2 = 4? Trump will go after other countries and keep invading, stealing their resources, their posts, their leaders, one after the other?
Of course he will. Of course he will. He's already mentioned Colombia. He's mentioned Cuba. He's mentioned Greenland. And here's the thing, I don't really even think it's about the oil for him. I think there are dark forces who want to pillage every country we can pillage, right? Every country that can't stand up to us. Um, I think he so desperately wants to be the dictator that Putin and Kim Jong-un and others are. He's told us this. He actually said, I want people to stand up and salute me the way they salute Kim Jong-un when he comes into the room. He wants to be a despot, an autocrat, a dictator, and he doesn't care who he sacrifices in the process, including the American people and our democracy. I think that's more important to him than the oil. So I think he has now realized that nobody can stop him. Nobody will stop him. And he's going to start taking whatever countries he believes he can take. I do think one of his goals is to break apart NATO, because even though NATO is actually kind of there to protect us, and we're there to protect the other signatories of NATO. And as we all know, the only time Article 5, which says, an attack on one NATO nation is an attack on all, was invoked, was deployed, was to help us after 9/11. I mean, he's got it all ass backwards because his head operates in ass backward fashion. And how long that body can run on Big Macs and Diet Cokes, that I don't know. But he looks worse every day, and we're waiting that out too, aren't we?
And we are. And what's your reaction to someone who worked in law enforcement so long, for Marco Rubio to call what we did to Maduro a law enforcement action? And you were also in the Army. I can't think of law enforcement actions where months of training went on, hundreds of men of the military, maybe $500 million estimating, and 80 people on the ground were killed. What kind of law enforcement action was that?
Dean, think about the inconsistencies are laughable. They are as laughable as they are obvious. He said, we have to blow all of these little boats out of the water, right? Little boats, which don't even have enough fuel to get halfway to the United States, never mind all the way. Little boats, which they claim were running fentanyl, and yet the Maduro document doesn't mention the Maduro indictment doesn't mention the word fentanyl once. It's all about cocaine. Setting that aside, it was so dangerous that we had to use the military to blow these boats out of the water and kill as many Venezuelans as we could. Oh, but when we're going into the country proper and bombing the crap out of it and trying to, grab up at the president and the first lady, no. Those are just law enforcement operations. Well, wait a minute. You know what we usually do to drug boats, Dean? We interdict them using civilian law enforcement, which we easily could have done with these little drug boats instead of blow them out of the water. So his rationale, it just falls under the weight of its own frivolity because he's inconsistent from one assertion to the next. But in the court of public opinion, none of it matters. It may matter come the midterms, but it only matters when you walk into a court of law. And let me just tell you, I don't want to get off on the Maduro indictment, but when that indictment says we indicted Maduro because he is in bed, he's partnered with Tren de Aragua, TDA, right? That dangerous drug running gang. That's part of the reason, a large part, we had to indict him and bring him to justice. In April, his own intel community, 18 agencies issued a memo publicly saying there's no connection. We see no connection between the Maduro government and TDA. Dean, you know what that is. That's big fat Brady evidence, exculpatory evidence. Maduro will call 18 intelligence organization heads to prove that the indictment has holes in it bigger than the holes in those drug boats.
But before I let you go, because we're hitting a hard break here, for people joining late, so the crime, if they deem that it is murder, it's a homicide, that the state actors like Keith Ellison's my friend, the Attorney General of Minnesota, can file charges, then the federal officers will have certain immunity claims they can bring up, but they don't get to walk scot-free. They get a prosecution and they can raise it, which is important because it tells other ICE agents the law applies. You're not above the law. And that's what Trump wants them to believe, that they're above the law. So that's an important step, right?
Yeah. And I saw somebody quoted me. I didn't see it. Maybe you saw this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where there was a statement issued by some Minnesota state official saying, "Hey, ICE, get out of our state."
The mayor,
Mayor Fry. To which I say, no, yeah, maybe ICE get out of your state, but not before you arrest the ICE officer who may have committed murder, assuming the evidence supports that.
Right.
Okay, but first you hold those folk accountable, because if you don't, I said last night, um, with accountability, all things are possible. Without accountability, we get Donald effing Trump. So how about we try accountability?
I agree. So, Clem, thank you so much for joining us at Breaking News Day. Again, follow your YouTube, right? Justice Matters and your Substack. Anything else you want to plug before I let you go?
That's plenty. That's enough.
Thank you, brother. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone, for making time to join us as well. I see all the comments. I wish you could respond. Have a great day, everyone.